Welcome, everyone. My name is Aline Saraiva Okelo. I work with the Rural Water Supply Network, hosted by SCAT Foundation, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today to this webinar, Demystifying System Strengthening Part 2, Bridging the Engineering and Systems Thinking in Rural Water Supply. So this webinar is in partnership with Agenda for Change. We're very happy to host this webinar together with them. And we have colleagues also from Ask for Water, from Ghana, from Malawi, and from Uganda. So this is the agenda of what we'll be covering today. So I've just done the welcome to all of you. I'll hand over to my colleague from Agenda for Change, Alex Shannon, and she will give us a bit of a framing of why we are doing this webinar together. And then we will listen to stories from decision makers and practitioners. We'll have a dialogue between Kirsten Dannert and Bethlehem regarding barriers and opportunities in system strengthening and engineering systems. We'll then move on to Ghana and we'll listen from Professor Kobena on policy and implementation examples in Ghana. And then finally, we'll have a story from Uganda on technical wash service delivery and systemic accountability by Martha Naigaga. After this, we'll have a very short Q&A block, and then we'll move on to an interactive panel addressing the myths of system strengthening. So Muti Nhlema will be moderating this section. And then we'll have another Q&A block, and finally closing remarks by Sean Fury from RWSN. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Alex Shannon, the Deputy Coordinator of Agenda for Change. Alex, welcome.
Thank you, Aline, and hello to everyone. Good day. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's crucial and very fun and interactive conversation. So thank you for joining us. I am grateful to be here today. We are grateful to be here today with our friends and allies at the Rural Water Supply Network. Many of you may not know, but we are strategic allies and we share many of the same members within our networks. And this webinar, as Aline alluded to earlier, is part 2, Demystifying Systems Strengthening. And this marks an important shift in our work together. When we held our first event last year around a similar time, we focused on establishing more of the conceptual need for a systems approach. And today we are moving more firmly into actions. And we are here to talk about how to make the integration happen on the ground, which brings us to the core reason that we are here today and who is in the room with us. We've brought together a unique and broad group of actors today, and that is by design, because for too long, the water sector has struggled with an unnecessary divide or a silo between the engineers who design the water infrastructure and the systems practitioners who design the long-term governance, finance, and policy frameworks. So the reality is that we need everyone working together and that technical success is impossible without robust systems, and that robust systems have nothing to govern without sound infrastructure. So the problem isn't that these two groups, engineers and systems practitioners, don't want to collaborate. It's often that they operate with different languages, different metrics, and perhaps different assumptions. So we are here to present the bridging the gap concept. We believe that the path to sustainable water service delivery is one where engineering expertise is integrated with systems thinking, not separate from it. So what does that mean for our time together today? Our goal for the next 90 minutes is to break down these silos by directly challenging the persistent, costly, and unproductive assumptions that hold us back, the ones that suggest infrastructure can stand alone from policy, or that focusing on long-term systems strengthening is too slow. And we are going to hear some practical stories from Ghana, Uganda, and Malawi today that will show how we can achieve true integration between technical quality and long-term service delivery, and helping to bridge perspectives across those engineers and the systems practitioners that I spoke of earlier. So to wrap up this framing, and before we move to our speakers, we want to hear from you all, from the audience. So to kick things off, you're going to see a poll appear, and we want to know who is in the room with us today. So who are you in the WASH ecosystem is the first question. And there are numerous answers there. You can only pick one. So pick the one that best describes you. And if you scroll down, there's a second question, which is, which role do you identify with? Engineering, systems, or both? And we'll give you a minute or two to finish that poll. And I'm looking to my moderators to tell me when we have enough answers.
I think we can close the poll now.
Okay, great. You all should be seeing the results of the poll appearing on your screen. So it looks like by far and wide, the majority of you and of us are considered practitioners implementing projects. We have some private sector representation, government and public sector donors, researchers, network and coordination platforms like ours, students, and others. And oh, wow, interesting. Okay, so as far as what role you identify with, it's almost exactly the same between engineering and systems, 29 and 28% respectively, and both. So some very clear overlap for almost half of you, 43%. Great. Well, then I hope this conversation today is going to resonate with many of you and that you will actively contribute to the discussions. And thank you. I believe I'm handing it over to Sean. Great.
Great. Hello, everyone. So thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm really looking forward to a very interesting discussion on some of these myths around system strengthening. And I'm really pleased that we've got a fantastic panel for you today who are going to tell you some stories of their experiences. So we have with us today Dr. Kirsten Dannett, who is the director of Ask for Water Limited, now based in Scotland. And she is been with over 25 years of experience in the sector and previous director of the Rural Water Supply Network. And then we have Dr. Bethlehem Mengistu, who is the Global Coordinator for Agenda for Change and is a very well-known figure as a global WASH expert and proponent of systems change. And then we have Professor Kwabena Nyako from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi in Ghana, who is at the Civil Engineering Department. And I had the pleasure of working with Professor Nyako under the Real Water Programme and various other projects as well. So very, very happy to have you here. And then finally, we have Martha Ngaga from Senior Environmental Health Officer at the Ministry of Water and Environment from Uganda. So very great to have these different perspectives from the private sector, from NGOs, from academia, and from government. So I will now hand over to the first segment, which is on Bethlehem and Kirsten, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sean, moderators, and everyone for organising it. And thanks to all of you for attending this webinar today. I'm really, really excited. And I'm going to kick off this conversation, which is between Bethlehem and myself, to kind of get us going. Just by thinking about maintenance, first of all, so rural water systems, whatever systems they are, they're always going to require maintenance to operate. And that maintenance needs to be managed, it needs finance, it needs spare parts, and of course, ongoing external support. So maintenance is a given. And it doesn't just happen because things go wrong with systems, it's needed. But one of the problems is that there's evidence that as many as 1 in 3 of rural water supply systems fail within the first 1 or 2 years after they've been constructed and installed. So early failure, I would call that premature failure. And myself and others argue that this premature early failure is probably the result of poor infrastructure, poor construction in the first place. And then kind of throwing in hand pumps, one of the technologies used in rural water supplies. There are conditions where the submerged components, that's the components underground, under the water, that they corrode rapidly. And corrosion, in simple terms, means rusting. And rusting or corroding hand pumps isn't good news for users. This rusting happens, the corrosion happens, because basically the wrong kind of materials have been installed in groundwater that's aggressive, that has particular properties. This has been a problem since the 1980s in many countries. And basically, it's over 4 decades, and many water users have been paying a high price for this rapid corrosion. So the Rural Water Supply Network's Stop the Rot initiative, which I lead, we started in 2021. We're trying to really see how these quality issues with hand pumps, including corrosion, but also quality of components and boreholes, how that can be systematically addressed, how to ensure quality. So that's the starting point, and I'm going to hand over to you, Bethlehem.
Thank you, Kirsten. What you've shared really highlights the part that everyone sees, that everyone can see, right? It's when pumps stop working or boreholes fail too soon. It's obvious, it's very visible. But what people often don't see is the layer beneath. And that's the policies, the incentives, the financing flows, the institutional arrangements that either support the infrastructure with a standardized recognition on quality and other key factors, or the layers that either enable the longevity of the infrastructure or fall short of what's needed to keep it working. And Agenda for Change focuses on that layer, working with governments to strengthen those foundations so that quality becomes consistent rather than dependent on individual projects or champions. So focusing on the invisible, which enables or may derail the visible. And hearing your examples really brings this to life. And it makes me want to ask you, when we zoom out from quality, why does construction matter so much for the wider water or wider wash system?
Well, that's a great question, Bethlehem. It matters. I mean, good quality infrastructure at the outset, it's not an option. It's the foundation of every water system being able to work. It needs to be right. And I completely concur with what you're saying. It's that it's really important, it's essential that the organizations that are behind water supply projects, the implementers, and those who finance them really consider quality through the whole process. That's right from initiation, through planning, procurement, if private sector is used, through contract management and sign-off. And if any one of these aspects isn't properly catered for, then the quality will suffer, and ultimately the users will suffer with that poor quality infrastructure. And as an engineer myself, I really care about the pipes, the pumps, and the technical details and how they're brought about. And just to take a couple of examples, in the case of boreholes, if the hydrogeology or the groundwater around the borehole isn't well understood, if the borehole is badly designed, if it's not straight, if it's installed with low quality materials, or it's not properly developed to get clean water, you have a problem. That was a lot of technical content, and forgive me for that. But those are all the things that needs to happen, and there's more in the case of a borehole, for example. So even with the best management in the world, if a borehole's poorly constructed or poorly sited in the first place, it's going to keep causing you trouble. So with that, let me pass the ball back to you again, Bethlehem.
Oh, thanks, Kirsten. That's a really critical point. Getting the basics right is non-negotiable, and the technical aspects matter. They are fundamental and they matter. And your explanation takes us directly into the system side of the story. So when a borehole keeps failing, systems thinking helps us move from reacting to understanding. And what that means, instead of only asking what broke, we begin asking, why did it break? So it's looking at aspects like, you've already mentioned some of this, looking at was supervision properly budgeted for? Was life cycle costing factored into from the beginning instead of assuming communities would somehow manage the O&M? Did procurement reward quality or simply the lowest bid? And who is responsible when infrastructure stops performing? So what system strengthening does is it ultimately helps us align those upstream conditions so that the infrastructure is set up for long-term success. And more importantly, this isn't abstract work. It shows up in tangible, real processes, from joint reviews to planning cycles to how ministers coordinate and how partners align behind government priorities. And it's really the difference between firefighting and preventing fires in the first place. So back to you, Kristen.
Yeah, so no, I mean, I agree with you, and it's not just a field issue. The issue is with the institutions and the processes that are behind what happens in the field. Yeah, you mentioned supervision, drilling supervision, which is a really important aspect, ensuring that if drilling is contracted out or even if it's done in-house, that it's supervised properly. But to have that supervision, the cost of that needs to be included in the project. The hydrogeologists to do that need to be available. It requires knowledgeable supervisors. They need to be well equipped. So that's, again, what's kind of beyond and behind in the field to make sure that happens. And through RWSN, really for a couple of decades, we've really been pushing for drilling professionalism, standards, training. But what we've seen is that institutional uptake is inconsistent. So with Stop the Rot, this new initiative, we're really trying to draw much more attention to hand pump quality issues and solutions, and trying to bring stakeholders together to really ensure quality boreholes and hand pumps. I mean, kind of back to you, Bethlehem, are there any opportunities that are being missed, or what do you think can be done to consistently ensure high quality engineering and to make sure that that becomes the norm in rural water service provision?
Yeah, it's quite critical and quite timely. Thank you, Kristen. And I'm really glad you raised this question. I think the fact that we're having this conversation and we're tackling the issue head on in itself is conveying that the answer is integration and collaboration and collective action. And it goes right into the heart of how the sector operates, right? And what this conversation between us shows is that engineering and systems thinking are not competing perspectives. They're deeply interdependent. And I'd like to go back to the myths that were shared at the beginning. there's a bit of myth busting that we need to do, and this session will also facilitate that. There's a myth that we often hear, and that's engineers only care about the hardware, while systems people only care about policy. But in practice, we're actually addressing the same problem from different angles. Engineers bring rigor, standards, technical insights. Systems practitioners bring governance, financing, institutional clarity that allows that engineering to succeed. So the question, I believe, shouldn't be about which matters more, but the question should be, how do we design them together from the start so they reinforce each other? And I would like to also encourage participants listening in and participating in the session today to, also ask themselves, where do these myths show up in our work? Where do they show up in your work? And what would integration look like in practice for you? What would collaboration look like in practice for you? And I'll stop there and hand over to Sean.
Great, thank you very much. So I think we've already starting to get a few questions coming into the comments that we'll come back to after this first round of stories. But do put your questions that you have in the Q&A box, or if you want to be part of the conversation, just comment on some of the things, share your own experiences. Please do that in the chat box. So our second story now, in terms of policy and research, comes from Professor Nyako. So Professor, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sean, and good to have you all. Thank you for coming. I see we have 218 participants. My name is Kwabena Nyako. I work at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So I'd like to pick it up from where Kirsten and Bethlehem ended. It is clear that we need infrastructure. And it's also important for us to realize that the wash infrastructure, water and sanitation infrastructure will be meaningless unless it gives us the service that we require, which will be a certain quantity of water at a good quality. In terms of the pricing, it should be affordable, it should be sustainable. And I think this is what we are all looking for. If we take rural water supply, many years ago in Ghana, we had one company responsible for both urban and rural. And at a point, the sector agreed to separate rural water and use a different approach where we're going to emphasize on community management. Community management, because at that time, the understanding was once you bring in the community, give them a role to play in terms of the management, because they are closer to the system, they will take good care and sustainability will be enhanced. We also decided to work with the private sector to provide goods and services, and then we asked government to facilitate. So we had our engineers working in terms of designing the boreholes, looking for water, constructing, and then we also work with the soft engineers or the soft skilled, the software experts, specifically our planners, helping with the planning. We also worked with psychologists to help us understand the behavior, because I'm sure you all know it's possible to design a technology that works technically, but may not be acceptable to the users. So acceptability is important. So we have to work with the psychologists, sociologists, economists, finance persons to help us do the work. Fast forward 30 years down the line, we have come to realize that there are issues, as Kirsten did indicate, that a good number of the water facilities are not functioning at any given point. If you are lucky, it will be 30%. That's 1 in 3. If you are not lucky, it can be 50%. And when we ask ourselves what is happening, we realize that it is important to work closely. That is both the hardware and the software specialist. And that is not that easy. But it is important we work together, evaluate our work, and then refine it with time to address emerging challenges. Nowadays, there are a lot of emerging technologies coming up. And what that means is that also needs to be factored in. So, in terms of the integration, if after providing the infrastructure where we need our engineers to do a good job, because if you do a good job in terms of providing the infrastructure, using the right materials, designing it well, constructing it well, it will have a good effect on the long-term sustainability. Well-constructed systems will ensure minimum operations and maintenance costs. Well-designed, constructed engineering facilities will enhance reliability. If the construction is not done well, you have a lot of costs, and the likelihood is that you abandon it at some point. So it is important to have the infrastructure well in place. Once infrastructure is in place, we still have a lot of questions to answer. Which institutions will manage it? And for institutions, I'm referring to service authority, which institution will have responsibility for regulation, which institution will check the accountability mechanisms to make sure that all actors, all stakeholders are playing their role. If that is not done, I'm afraid the system will fail. So we need to look at our institutions and remember, our institutions fit in the overall national framework. There are times that we don't even have control. As we speak, in Ghana last year, we had one ministry responsible for both water and sanitation. But today, we have 2 separate ministries. And it does have implications even on how we work. And in this case, it is due to this is happening as part of the political economy. We are not insulated. We need to be aware. Policies. You know, we come up with policies, and from time to time, we do revise the policies. And once you have your policies in place, it is also important to ensure that you have your supporting legal instruments, such as the acts, the LIs, and regulations. As we speak, in Ghana, we have a new policy, and the new policy has acknowledged that there were issues with the community management approach for rural water. And there's a need to professionalize. Good point. But the question is, how do we professionalize? We've started piloting where the National Facilitating Agency has started managing small towns pipe schemes. Now they are managing maybe 10-15% on a pilot basis. And the plan is to take over all the systems. This is a process. Now policy is in place. The legal aspects ongoing. We need to get an act to back it, the legislative instruments in place. And in a situation like this, it may create some uncertainties for some other actors. For example, if we have development partners that are ready to assist, indeed they do support technical assistance and in some cases financing to support some projects. And they need clarity to know how best they can support. So it's always important to complete these processes. But I must say it is not easy, it is not straightforward. There's a bit of give and take, some discussions, and that will be summed up as the governance. That is how decisions are made. And this is very important. Another aspect has to do with financing. How do we finance rural water supply? Policy may be explicit in that tariff should cover all operations and maintenance costs. But when it comes to implementation, there are times that it becomes a challenge. How that is linked to budgeting systems, and if we don't have the budget and the tariff is not enough, all what it means is that there will be long downtimes. Customers will not have the service, and what we don't want is exactly what will happen. Water quality will be compromised, public health issues will be raised. So I think in terms of the policy and the implementation, this is what we have to deal with. And it's important that at the beginning, both the engineers and the system thinkers work together. Not only that, we need a clear enabling environment. Once the enabling environment is clear, it makes it much easier. But as I did mention earlier, because of the political economy, some changes may even happen outside the water sector, and that will have an effect on what we do. So I think it's important we bear this in mind, monitor, evaluate, give feedback, and always refine the processes or the decision-making processes to ensure we can deliver sustainable services, ensuring that all of us, we deliver services to all, that is universal coverage, without leaving anyone behind. Sean, do you want to come for my mic?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's really good points made, that all of the technical stuff does not happen in a vacuum. There's all the everything around it and power, and at the end of it, there's a, no matter how much we want to be just engineers and just build stuff, politics matters, and I think that's an important aspect. So now our last, but definitely not least story comes from Madam Martha Nagaiga from Ministry of Water and Environment. Thank you, Madam, for joining us today from Brazil. I understand. Are you at the COP or something like that? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, evening, everybody, depending on where you're watching us from. I'd like to share Uganda's experience. Uganda wash sector offers a valuable lessons in bridging engineering and system thinking, especially in how accountability mechanisms, performance audits, and decentralization impact wash service delivery, especially in rural areas. In the early 2000s, the wash sector in Uganda underwent several reforms and introduced many policies and legislations to support and anchor wash service delivery, including coming up with the National Water Policy, the Water Act, the Local Government Act, among others. And these transformed wash service delivery and placed district local governments at the center of wash services, especially in rural areas. Emphasis was placed on demand-driven approaches, community involvement, and districts became responsible for planning, budgeting, and implementing rural water supplies with technical oversight from the Directorate of Water Development in the Ministry of Water and Environment. Relatedly, the sector relied more on community-based maintenance system models, where communities were required to participate in the management and taking care of the water points that had been provided. Relatedly, many shortcomings emerged. For example, the water user committees or water and sanitation committees that were meant to manage these water points struggled a lot and experienced a lot of fallout and this was basically due to the voluntary nature of their assignments and the related weak financial models that were associated with the community-based maintenance system. And this resulted in functionality stagnation at about 85% for several years, despite the investments that had come in both from government and non-state actors. So the sector, the rural water sector in this regard, in order to address this, I went ahead to develop the community-based maintenance system plus. We call it the CBS plus model, which was introduced mainly to address these issues and professionalize management, operation and maintenance of these water systems through the area service providers who should be having clear contract-based performance arrangements. But in all this, it places the district water offices or the district engineers at the center of service delivery of water services, making and requiring them to make justifiable technical decisions, reporting and accounting for their actions, but also solving wash problems in their respective areas of jurisdiction. They not only design wash systems, but also lead multi-stakeholder coordination platforms. In the district, the water officers are in charge of the water, but the nature of their office also requires them to have people to support the community mobilization function, but also the sanitation and hygiene promotion function, in addition to the technical team that does the borehole maintenance and things like that. Relatedly, they also have to coordinate with other local governments, including NGOs and private sector players. So they are called upon to balance technical delivery roles in convening, but also budgeting and implementing, and also stakeholder engagement. So at their level, systems thinking is not just an option, but a key ingredient in their duty, and they must embrace it, balancing speed and quality in service delivery, again with the pressures that arise from the central government that authorizes them, in this case the Ministry of Water and Environment, but also from their local politicians, as well as the community demands that arise from time to time, especially from water-stressed areas or areas that have not been covered. In Uganda, we have a commitment to deliver water to all the villages, safe water to all the villages, in a way that every village must have at least one, and recently 2 water sources per village. And so far, we have 80% of the villages covered. So the demand is still enormous. It's still enormous, and the duty of the water officer remains critical in the delivery of the water services at that level. But relatedly, it calls upon them to have a skill that of balancing all these pressures in addition to the technical wash services that they must deliver from time to time. For example, they must keep reporting to the Ministry of Water, they must keep reporting to the Ministry of Finance, but also the Office of the Prime Minister. So all those reports they must do, but while they're at that, they must also continue to deliver the wash services that are much needed in their communities. So they are called upon and are required to realize that speed and quality are complementary rather than competing priorities, even amidst system challenges embedded in their long and bureaucratic processes, such as in the procurement and the implementation. The engineer must remain alive to the fact that the proposed solutions or the wash projects that they are putting across are sustainable locally owned and contextually appropriate, that the users will actually appreciate and work with them and use them and not fall back on safe options from time to time. Accountability mechanisms, including audits, community engagement, and technical oversight, work well only when they are paired with local government leadership and a shared system vision across the board. So bridging engineering and systems thinking means shaping technical decisions and accountability processes with a strong sense of local ownership, clarity of roles, and measured responses in the face of donor and even community pressures. Sometimes the communities cannot wait to have a service, and they will quickly go through their leaders and impart immense pressure on the district water office. For emerging issues of late regarding climate resilience and environment and social safeguarding, the water engineer again must incorporate all these aspects at the design or conception stage. And having the end in mind, of course, is important to minimize the need to retrofit already existing systems or the usual phenomenon of white elephant projects. We have projects that are placed in very, very critical areas that are water stressed but have failed to work out because some things were ignored at some point of the project implementation or planning. And this does not work well amidst the meager resources that we have, that such a resource goes to waste because some aspects of our system were ignored. Issues to do with water quality or community engagement and all that political buying comes in. In the end, the system is about service delivery, and in this case, in our context, it means having water flowing sustainably, proper O&M systems, increasing access, reducing the people who do not have access to a safe water source, and having more people gain access, and happy communities. This has been addressed largely because the water system or the wash sector does not work in isolation from the rest of the country bigger framework. So in Uganda, in addition to strengthen the wash sector regarding systems thinking, there has been a compelling shift towards systems thinking regarding the programming that we have embraced now, the programmatic approach to planning. We fall under the Human Capital Development Program, where we are not only looking at our system in WASH, but also relating them to other contributors of the human capital development, like health and education and community development. So systems thinking has been placed at the center of WASH service delivery and must remain there. We are going to have universal access to water and sanitation by 2030. I thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think one of the things I take from this, in fact, from all four perspectives that we've heard, is that we all want the same thing. It's pretty clear. We all want the same thing. We just have a slightly different way of describing some of the elements of it, and maybe slightly different emphasis on and different things, and maybe slightly different terms and levels of specificity. But it's good because we all want the same thing. So let's just focus on that. So now let's move to the next section. Thank you to our fantastic speakers for giving those four fantastic perspectives. And I'd now like to introduce Mutin Lema, from team leader from Baseflow in Malawi, who is going to take this next section forward on looking at some of the myths and taking them apart. So take it away, Mutin.
Hopefully I can take them apart. For those of you who are as old as I am, you might remember the Ghostbusters, which was a movie back in the day. They used to have a song that went with the movie. So I'm going to modify the song for this next session, which is about Mythbusters. If there's something wrong with your water point, who are you going to call? Mythbusters. And that's the session we're in right now. We are going to look at the myths that keep engineers and systems thinkers separated. That's what we're going to look at together today. You've heard a lot about some of the conversations that have taken place, some of the experiences of our speakers. We're going to dig into those in a lot more detail. But before we leap into that, another poll for you. We want to understand, which myth do you think is the most common? There are several myths that influence the way that we work. And in our conversations, we came up with these 5 myths. And we want you to vote on which one is the most common. And sadly, you can only pick one. So the first myth: engineers only care about infrastructure. Systems people only care about policy. I think Beth stole my thunder and already mentioned that one. So that one should not be a surprise. The next one: systems thinking slows down implementation. Thinking too much about systems slows down implementation. We must implement action. The third myth: you need expensive consultants to do systems thinking. All of that money we're spending on systems thinking and systems strengthening, is it really worth it? Maybe we should drill another borehole. Infrastructure. The fourth one: gender issues are a distraction. What matters is the water point is working. Why should we care about gender and any of such issues? And finally, systems work is all soft skills. Engineering is only rigorous parts. I think one of our speakers even mentioned hardware engineers and software engineers. So we hand it over to you, our those of you who have attended this webinar. Which one is the most common myth of these 5 myths? Engineers care about infrastructure. System strengthening is slow. Consultants for system thinking are expensive. Gender is a distraction. Or systems work is all about soft skills. Engineering is about rigorous skills. Take your vote and let's see what the votes will bring us. And while you're doing that, I will subject you to my horrible singing voice. If there's something wrong with your water point, who are you going to call? Mythbusters. Okay, so you should have all voted by now. And now we're going to see which is the most common myth in the WASH sector, because then we're going to go back to our speakers and deconstruct these myths and see which ones are the most common, and we'll delve into those ones. Those of you who had questions, don't hesitate. Don't worry, we'll come back to those questions a little later on. And here we are with the results. And engineers only care about infrastructure, and systems people only care about policy. Seems to have had the most votes. System strengthening slows down implementation, and that is followed by systems work is all about soft skills, and engineering is about rigorous parts. I think the prof might have influenced some of you. And of course, expensive consultants as well as gender is a distraction got the lowest score. So now we know what myths exist. Now we know what biases are somehow the most common in this space. And for the sake of this presentation, we're going to focus on 2 myths. Fortunately, we were taking a gamble. We thought that the 2 most popular myths would be, this one would be number 1, so we were correct very clearly. And this myth: engineers only care about infrastructure and systems people only care about policy. Let's bust that myth. So I want to go back to our presenters, and I have a series of questions I would like to ask them. But actually, before I leap to the questions I had, there was one question I would like to pose to Martha and the prof, particularly about engineers. Now, someone in the chat said this isn't about engineer busting, so we're not going to bust engineers or bash engineers. But Martin Watsisi had a question or a statement. He said engineers could be the best systems thinkers if only they helped us understand the logic behind why things are the way they are. I'll repeat, engineers could be the best systems thinkers if they helped us understand the logic behind why things are the way they are. To our engineers on the panel, what do you think of that? Essentially, The implication is that engineers are not yet the best systems thinkers because they don't take time to explain how things are the way they are. And just to let you know, I'm also an engineer. I'm a civil engineer. So I'm also wondering, is that actually true? So to our engineers and our presenters, Beth and Kirsten, you're free to also jump in if you'd like. What is your view of that point? Is it that engineers just don't take the time to explain the logic behind things? Anyone can take this one. Should I pick someone? Martha, we'll go with you. What are your thoughts on that one? Engineers could be the best system thinkers if they took the time to explain the logic behind why things are the way they are.
Thank you, Moti. Indeed, they'll be the best system thinkers, and that goes back to their training. I am not an engineer, but I certainly think if we address it from that point that requires engineers to think systems right from their training, it would be okay. But here we are, and we must address the challenge head on. So if the engineers in their own right are not able to quickly do systems thinking, and this calls for professional teams, which are usually present for projects that we have, people to do with the communities, economists, public health people, and all these other professions that we can borrow from. So whereas the engineers might be keen on delivering the pipes and the pumps and the taps, they can leverage support from the rest of the team members that are in charge of safeguarding, that are in charge of community development and all those. Thank you.
So some of it might be stemming from the training that it probably needs to be more integrated. Thank you. Though you are just a systems thinker, not an engineer, very interesting insight. Prof, as a fellow civil engineer, what are your views on that point? That we could be the best systems thinkers. Yes, over to you.
Correct. I agree perfectly. But I must say, if you look at our training at the undergraduate level, it's more of the technical exposure to community engagement, development. It's not a lot. But most of the time at the postgraduate level, we do spend time on tariff setting, the institutional issues, the policy, the strategies. So I know that there are some engineers who are doing very well in that space, just as our counterparts, the sociologists, etc., those who have worked with engineers in that space for a long time do understand a lot of the hardware. So essentially, it should be incorporated in the curriculum. And I must say, where I work for our postgraduate program, we do have components. We do address that at the MSc level, but at the undergraduate level, it is very limited. But in addition to that, you may still need the experts, the economists, the psychologists, etc.
Yes. So you still need to integrate the other elements, just like Martha also touched on. I just wanted to, there's been a comment in the chat, which I'll just read, and then we'll continue with the conversation. Interesting comment from Alexi. The burden of systems thinking has been put on the wrong donkey. We engineers tend to be confined to project cycle. What happens after isn't our realm. Interesting comment there. So basically, engineers, people are putting too much on engineers. That is not our business. We should just focus on the infrastructure. The rest is outside our realm. Very interesting comment, Alexi. Now, moving to the myth that we were discussing, the myth that engineers are more concerned with infrastructure and systems people only care about policy. My question to all of you, and anyone can take this question, which of you in the past believed that myth? Which of you actually believed or embraced that myth and it influenced your work? Let's see. Who wants to come forward? Kirsten, tell me, you actually believe that myth? I don't believe you.
You're right.
Serious?
But you're right. But I saw that. I really saw that. And particularly in my early years working in Uganda, there were, of course, people are different. Whatever people's training, people are different. What people are interested in differs. So I have worked, and no names mentioned, but I have worked with engineers. I've gone to the field with engineers who only cared about the engineering. And I've been on projects, I mean, in Uganda, I can also talk about other countries, where I've had working with engineers who have sat down when any community discussion is going and waited till it's over. It prepares me. I've seen it. But I have also seen engineers taking a lead in other issues. And one of the classic examples in the Ministry of Water in Uganda was the software working group. It was a working group really looking at software soft issues, headed by an engineer. So I think a lot of it depends on attitudes. And coming back to your previous question, attitudes, listening to one another, being prepared to explain things to another. I'm going to stop there because Beth and I've been doing a lot of that over the past weeks. But yeah, so I was stuck my hand up. I've seen it. It's a nightmare.
You've seen it. Yeah, I've had a similar experience where I remember we were working with an engineer, well, more of a computer engineer who designed the software that people could use on their phones for data collection. He didn't care about engaging the people who would use it. He just cared about the software. So it was actually very interesting that, don't you want to know what the users would be feeling or thinking about the thing that you're creating? It's like, no, I only care about the software. So, but is it something we should actually be concerned about? Now, taking this to the rest of the panel, this idea that this myth that we hold, because I used to hold it as well. I used to also think my concern is just the infrastructure. As long as I follow the standards, that's fine. Is this particular myth, where does it come from? Where, I think, Beth, you asked a very interesting question. How does this myth show up in your work? I would probably extend it a little further. Where does this myth come from? You saw it was the most popular myth. Where does it come from? I open it to the rest of the panel. Where does this myth come from? That engineers should only care about infrastructure. The rest is for systems thinkers. Where does that come from?
I have some ideas on, well, I mean, let me challenge you back. I mean, does it actually exist is what I question. I feel like it's an artificial divide, in all honesty. And I'm guilty of, being one of those people that used to think that engineers only like the hardware stuff. And, social scientists focused on, I'm a social scientist by training. So I would like to believe, I like to believe then that we focused on like the policy, the analysis and all these things. And then the engineers did the technical, the hardware. What changed my perspective is when I had the opportunity to work directly with district teams and national ministries. And, when you get a chance to be in rooms where planning takes place and then joint monitoring review takes place, you realize very quickly that these boundaries between the engineers and the systems people don't actually exist in practice at the practical level, because at the district level, I have seen that engineers constantly raising issues that are fundamental to systems. Engineers raise things like procurement rules that push them towards low quality materials. They exercise their consent. They also raise issues around budget ceilings that don't allow adequate supervision. They also talk about roles that weren't clearly defined, leaving them accountable for things that they don't have any authority over.
Yeah.
So engineers deal with systemic issues on the daily basis. They may not be labeled or categorized as analytical systems issues, but they are there and they're fundamental to the technical issue or the technical kind of component. And then, at national level, during my work, I've also seen how policy discussions often depend on technical insights. There are real discussions that take place at the ministerial technical level. What materials last in which groundwater conditions? These are things that are discussed, and what it costs to maintain a borehole, and what realistic staffing ratios are for pump mechanics. So these things, they're fluid. They're discussed at the policy level, in ministries, and so it makes me wonder whether are we giving life to something that doesn't exist? Because
are we giving life to something that doesn't, like,
because
it's artificial,
we want prominence.
It's not real.
Yeah, because we want prominence for the expertise we bring into the sector. And is it possible to look at the entire canvas to say this is the piece of my narrative, but this is the collective aim that we're all kind of pointing towards,
contributing to.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that it's a perception issue rather than an actual Yeah.
Yeah. Someone actually in the chat has written, I think this is James, who says he strongly agrees with you, Beth. So very clearly,
Thank you, James.
so this divide is artificial. It is not real. It's that each person has a piece of the narrative that they contribute to. And so these silos are somewhat artificial. Very interesting insight. I want to jump to the next myth, but I want to ask a question, the last question to everyone here. This is a myth that exists, and yes, it from what Beth has said, is artificial, and we have seen it in the case of what Kirsten has said. It shows up in various places. Now, the question I would ask you to the panel, very clearly, there are people who hold this myth. 40% of the people on this call, on this webinar, say that this is one of the, if not the most common myth. So the question is, what do we say to people, beyond what Beth has said, to get them to change their assumptions around this idea? What would you say to someone on this call, on this webinar, who believes this myth? What would you say to them to change their perception? Now, Beth has touched on a couple of things. It's not real, it's in your head. But what else can we say that can actually break those silos, to break that wall, imagined or otherwise, between engineers and systems thinkers, so that the engineers can be the best systems thinkers, like a previous commentator said? What can you say to someone who believes this myth? Going once, going twice. I'm going to start pointing someone out.
Oti, can I have a
Take a go. Thank you, Martha. Over to you. No problem. Martha, you can go first. And Prof, if you have something to add, you can jump on. Over to you, Martha. What would you say to someone who believes this myth?
Thank you so much, Muti. I would like to emphasize that whereas the engineers are positioned to deliver their technical bits, many times they are burdened with the issue of project management or contract management, and they're in charge of the rest of the team. So their decision, if it is not balanced, will largely lean on the technical side and ignore the rest of the aspects to do with the community mobilization and all those others. So given that they many times double also as project managers, puts them at that point where they must embrace partnerships, like one of the people in the comments said, that we must embrace partnerships and collaborations and teamwork and appreciating the role every team player brings into the room and letting them do what they need to do and not projecting one side of the coin as the most prominent or the most important. Thank you.
So basically bringing people, project engineers are usually project managers, which puts them at the forefront of having to deal with multiple aspects of a particular issue that they're dealing with in WASH. Now, thank you for that contribution, Martha. Anyone who wants to add before we move to the second myth?
Yes,
Kirsten.
one.
Okay, Prof. Then we'll go to
Yes,
Kirsten. Very quickly,
a quick
Prof.
one. There are times that it may not be due to the people, whether engineers or the software, but it may be poor in the environment. If the environment is not enabling, either engineers or the software personnel will have issues where you raise it, but it cannot be addressed because responsibilities have not been well allocated. For example, O&M policy is there, minor maintenance well captured, but maybe replacement of the pump, you don't know who to talk to. Or the one who has that responsibility has no budget. So at times these issues will surface and it will appear as if it's the two groups that are not talking to each other. But to be honest, in water space, I think the engineers and the system thinkers, they work closely because you cannot do otherwise.
Okay, fine.
Like the space where there's limited interaction with the communities in some utilities. Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. There are some questions here about the enabling environment. We'll come back to them during another Q&A towards the end of the session. Kirsten, if you can make your point very quickly before we jump to the next.
So engineers can't only think about infrastructure because infrastructure does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens linked to issues of corruption, accountability, policy. And secondly, systems people can't just think about policy because what is policy for? It's ultimately for the users, and that is about the water supply system. Underpinning that system is the infrastructure. So they're totally for each other and not without each other. The end.
So the end. So infrastructure doesn't exist in a vacuum. You need policies that actually are conducive, speaking to the enabling environment, but also you've got other aspects actually touching on the supply chains that were spoken about earlier. Excellent. So we move to the second myth. Because of time, I would have loved to continue. But the second myth actually was the one that got the least votes. But we're going to focus on it to really understand if indeed this is really not that much of a myth. And the myth was gender issues are a distraction. What matters is the water point is working. I wanted to share a very quick story about why this particular one was of interest to us. Just last week, I was attending a meeting where a group of us engineers were discussing rural water supply issues. And a female engineer commented to say, it does not matter whether on a water point committee you've achieved 50-50 representation of men and women. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the water point is working. So this is where this question, this particular myth was coming from. It's what inspired this particular myth, because it seemed that the female engineer was saying that gender is a distraction. What matters is that the water point is working. Now, to the panel, this is a myth that got the least votes, but do you think it should have gotten the least votes? Is this something that we take for granted, do we take or do we miss gender issues when it comes to infrastructure? Is this something that we miss? And what is the cost of missing gender issues? Over to the panel. Is gender really something we should consider in infrastructure?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay, over to you, Beth. Yes and yes.
It's a myth for a reason because it comes up again and again. The idea that gender and inclusion are add-ons, something we consider after the technical work is done. But systems that are designed around a typical user, which is often an able-bodied adult man, simply doesn't reflect the reality of the communities we serve. Real communities are diverse and they're intersectional. And imagine a woman who's also living with a disability, for example, experiences water access differently, and her needs are not special, they're real. And if we're not considering this at the design stage, like when we're doing siting, accessibility, safety, user interface, then we are excluding her. So we are doing harm. So gender and inclusion are not optional layers.
Sorry. Pause, Beth. I need to not push back, but to really get clarity. If people don't consider gender within the design, they are causing harm. Isn't that an exaggeration? Aren't you going too far? Are you being woke? Is that what this is?
Well, I'm only underlining the commitment that we've made as a community under the Sustainable Development Goals, which is to ensure everyone everywhere has access. And if we've signed up to that, then we should be realizing that commitment intentionally and not, just going after the low-hanging fruits or just numbers. When we mean everyone, we need to actually magnify the one and everyone, because that's the distinction. Not everybody's the same. So the one and everyone we should pay attention to. So I don't think gender and inclusion, they're not optional layers that we need to add on after the fact. They should be design principles, is my thinking. And in actual fact, they determine whether a service works for everyone or not, or just those who are already having most of the power and the mobility. So that's just my 2 cents.
So gender, thank you. Well, you that was more than 2 cents. That was like 5 cents. But still, gender and issues to do with inclusion are not just add-ons that we add at the end of a project, that when we remember that we need to include them, they have to be integrated within the project from the beginning. And that was Beth's point. But again, then looking at the subject of gender or just inclusion in general, you mentioned one particular example about disability, that disability is one aspect that you need to take into consideration when it comes to design. What other, specifically looking at gender, and I'll throw it to the rest of the panel, how else does gender impact on infrastructure that maybe we miss because we have this myth in our heads? What are other aspects of gender do we miss because we haven't taken gender into consideration in terms of the design? So disability was one. What other areas have we not thought about? I think, okay, Martha, you have unmiked, then we'll go to Kirsten. Over to you, Martha.
Yes, I think to appreciate it a little more, we need to think about who the user of this water point is. What are the realities that are true in their life? If it is a woman, what does that woman look like in terms of their physical? Are they short? Are they tall? Are they pregnant? Are they not? Where are we locating this source? What does it take for that woman to access the water amidst the rest of the roles that she must play in the home or in the community? How quickly is she able to fit in the water collection in the rest of the agenda of the day in terms of chores? So even the issue just of location, where are we siting this water source? Is it too far away? Is it very close? Is it close enough? Is it at the home? How does it make it a burden to access the water amidst the other challenges that she must encounter during the day? I mean, without thinking about all that, you may not know if you don't put yourself in the feet of that person. But if I am a pregnant woman and I'm going to walk downstream because the water point was placed there and it's alive and functioning, the water is flowing. But it will take me a lot of time to get there. And sometimes maybe it's flowing, but not very fast. I have to queue up the entire time. How does it fit with my other roles in the home that I have to go back? I'm not going to get into trouble and
okay, so distance
and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's a whole lot of things to think about in the life of the person, of the user.
So you need to think about the you need to think about the person who used that particular water point and consider issues to do with distance and age. Is it too far for them to walk and so on? So that also needs to be considered to ensure, to borrow what Beth said earlier, when we say everyone, we mean everyone has access to water. Over to you, Kirsten. You raised your hand. I like the way you raise your hand. You're like in a classroom. Over to you.
Please, Marty. Yeah. So
yes.
Just thinking about the planning and the management. So in the planning, and let's thinking of higher level infrastructure, let's taking many low income countries, the women collect the water in the family and the children, but who controls the purse strings for the family? So who, is that's often the man. So investing in water supply, in both in the investment and in the ongoing paying for its upkeep, is there a mismatch? Is that working? Is there a problem? Is there not? One person, one gender tends to collect, another gender controls the purse strings. What does that mean in the planning, in the financing of water supplies? And the other aspect is management committees, because it's the classic thing is to have more women in the committee, or I know in the Ugandan case, it's in women in lead positions. So, but treasurer, chair, etc., etc. Now, there's two issues around that. One is, what other tasks do women have? Household, family care, caring for parents, children, etc., cooking. How is that compatible with those roles? And do they have a voice? So if a woman is in a position of authority in a committee but doesn't have voice, this could possibly do even more damage than it's supposed to. So there are a whole set of issues around culture, around gender norms, and finance that I think are also important consider to be aware of.
Yeah, so we need to be aware about all these other dynamics around culture, around power, about who has voice, who doesn't, and see how that is integrated into this particular, particularly when we're designing WASH programs. But then coming back to the myth of gender again, I want to ask the same question I asked previously with the infrastructure question. And that is, what would you say? No, actually, let me ask this question. Where does this myth come from? Where does this myth come from that gender and equity and inclusion are just add-ons? Where does this come from? Someone in the chat has just written, unfortunately, I can't find the name, says, this is a conversation that's been going on for 40 years. And he said that he's not under the impression that things have changed. So very clearly, things have not changed. So that means the myth still persists. Where does it come from and how can we change that? How can we change people who have this myth in their brains? Where does it come from? How can we change it? Yes, very difficult question. Where does it come from? And how do we change it? You can answer either one of those parts. If you want to answer the part about how we change it, you can answer that. Go ahead, Kristen.
Is it the metrics? Is it about how we measure? Question mark.
Is it how we measure?
Actual is it the metrics? Is the problem with the metrics that we are thinking about metrics that don't, the lead metrics, is that the problem?
That's a very interesting question. Is it because because we don't measure it properly, therefore we don't consider it in design?
So for example, if our metric as you know, global wash community had been for 40 years around women time collecting water, if that had been the metric, would things have been differently? That isn't the metric.
Wow, that's an interesting question, and it's well, I think if we could have interaction with the people in the webinar, it would have been interesting. But put your response in the chat. She's asking, maybe things haven't shifted when it comes to the subject of gender because of the metric, because the metric is not tracking distance that women are walking or time it takes for women to walk to access water, women specifically. Could that be the reason? I would love to see what people say, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. But thank you. I think that is more of a challenge to this particular webinar. But Prof, I think you wanted to jump in, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in with your comment.
Oh, thank you. I think I do agree with the metric to an extent, even the way we measure coverage, because if someone is having a challenge and it's counted as the person is being served, then nothing is going to change. I'm even concerned about the early childhood institutions. What facilities do we give them? And I have this point to raise that it has happened before. Yes. This is on the previous one, where let's say government comes in and say, I want to increase water coverage. I know the cost of a borehole is $3. I want to provide 20,000, okay, 30,000 boreholes. I provide the money. On a bad day, some people get it, they go drill boreholes. No room for community engagement, etc. How do we handle such issues? It's just for us to think about it, not really to answer, but it does happen where someone says, I'm giving you money for this.
Yeah, so there is the influence of the funder based on what you've just said. Because of time, because we have to end on the dot, I would need to close this. But so thank you, panelists. A big hand for you. We have had to look at two myths. Engineers love or focus or care about infrastructure, and systems people only focus on policy. That is a myth, and it was the most popular myth. And we went to the least known myth, which is gender is a distraction. Actually, gender is a distraction. It's an add-on. It's really not the thing we should be concerned about. What matters is that water is flowing. So those are the myths we're looking at. And one thing that was common throughout these myths is the subject of including or bringing people into the conversation. Or what I would like to say, a common word now that's coming up a lot, co-creation. So whether it's issues of gender, are we including the people that we claim to be serving? whether it's infrastructure, like the prof said, bringing in other disciplines. And I think Kirsten touched on it as well. And Beth even said, it's an illusion. The problems that we are dealing with as a watch sector require that we co-create. We look at each person's story along that chain and see how each person brings their perspective so that nobody is missed out. I have a personal story I'll share very quickly. In my office, because I do hydrogeology, we're always into engineering. And I assumed that it was a free environment for the women in my office. But then I noticed that the women were not speaking. They were not coming forward to talk. So what I did, I provided the women the space to speak among themselves without any men in the room. And from that endeavor, I will not share what came out. What was very clear is that there was a lot of things that I assumed by virtue of living in this body as a man. And there were things I took for granted that only other women, based on their experience in other places, they understood. And this was only possible because we provided the space for them to speak, the space for them to create, to co-create with me and my leadership team. So with all of these myths, whether it's the others that we mentioned that we'll not get into, we need to involve the people that are either the water users who use the system or the financiers, the economists, the risk managers, the planners. We need to integrate and bring these players together in a process of co-creation so that we can solve the complex problems that we have in this future that we're going to. So on that note, I'll stop there and I'll end with my terrible song. If there's something wrong with your water point, who are you going to call? Mythbusters. And I hope we've busted some myths today. Thank you very much. And over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Muti. That's brilliant. Brilliantly moderated as ever. Great. So as we're just getting to the end here, and just wrapping up on what has been a really lively discussion, really great questions and comments, and in the chat, some that we didn't get to, but I think just a couple of questions that I think would have liked to have got to, but kind of ran out of time. So one was, how do we address the challenge of ensuring this integrity and collaboration across disciplines? I think that's an important question. And then a provocative question, is it the problem that we assume that rural communities don't deserve piped water at home? That would address lots of the issues. And that kind of comes back to the fact that at the end of the day, most of these things are come down to politics and political decisions. But then out of that drops a whole load of technical issues. So if we take, for example, India, the Jal Jeevan mission in there, the Prime Minister of India made the declaration that every single rural household in India would get a piped water connection within 5 years. That's mobilized a huge amount of domestic and international financing to happen. A huge amount of infrastructure is being built. So on one side, that political will was there, and it has made a huge difference. But it has left enormous technical and economic issues in terms of the amount of where is the water going to come from, who's going to maintain all the infrastructure that's being built over the last 5 years. So, but does that mean that it was a bad thing to do? I mean, there's always the issue of the quote of never make perfect the enemy of the good. The fact that something has happened in India is probably on balance a good thing, even if it's going to be ripples going on for many years in terms of what that means. I would say that really the big lesson that I think comes out of all of this is for all of us to really stay curious, keep learning, and be open. And I was brought to mind, if you look on YouTube, there's a British marketer, he's very British, called Rory Sutherland. He's into marketing and advertising. You might think, why am I talking about him? Well, he tells a great story in a lot of his presentations. He's a great storyteller. And it's about bees. And it's the fact that 80% of bees do what's known as the waggle dance. It's a where they circulate in a quite a restricted area, pollinating plant, collecting nectar to go to their hive, and they're really focused on tangible outputs. On right, how do we maximize efficiency in collecting what we need to keep our hive surviving? But then you have like 10-20% of bees that just bugger off. They just wander off all over the place and seemingly doing nothing useful at all. So how does that work? Because this species has been around for millions of years. And it comes down to the fact that it's about exploration versus exploitation. It's considered a trade-off, but you kind of need to do both. And it's because you need to maximize efficiency. You need to do things well to ensure the survival of your hive. But things can happen. If a cow comes into your field and eats all your flowers, then all of a sudden your food supply is gone. And that's where these explorer bees come in, because they have gone off and they have found new plants to pollinate. So if you think of this in terms of the conversation today, we need the types of, you could call them engineers, that are focused on maximizing efficiency, maximizing really solid, good designs. But you also need those that are going out, they're exploring, they're trying to change policy, they're trying to change the system. You might think, what are they doing? There's nothing tangible. Why should we fund this? It doesn't seem to be achieving anything. But when it does achieve something, it achieves something really, really significant and really essential to the entire system. So there we go. That's a bit of a metaphor. So thank you very much again for everyone that's joined. It's been a fantastic, really fantastic a number of people that have joined us today. And just to finish up with just to say that all the presentations and recordings will be available on the RWSN website, and that in this current series we have next week's webinar is going to be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to this one. It's getting into the nuts and bolts of the role of drilling association. So we're going in some ways very micro, but we have got some amazing drillers and different perspectives from Malawi, from Nigeria, from Uganda, from Kenya, who are going to talk about how their experiences of establishing a drilling association, what works, what doesn't, what is the role of a drilling association, why should we care, and why do drillers who are often competing against each other come together to and collaborate. So please join us for that one next week. Then in 2nd of December, we have our annual meeting, which is where you can find out more about RWSN and how it all fits together and what we've been doing over this year. And you've got an opportunity to find out more and get involved if you want to. And then on the 9th of December, our last webinar of the current series is on rapid corrosion of hand pumps and whether we can finally address this issue that has been plaguing us for decades. But it's still important, no, despite what we've been talking about, the importance of pipe systems, the importance of systems thinking, some of these simple technologies, simple isn't always easy, and that there are still tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people worldwide that still rely on this technology, and it needs to be done well, and it can be done well. So it's when you look at a whole system, sometimes it's the small tweaks, looking at these leverage points. If you fix that problem, it has a whole cascade of benefits. So thanks again, fantastic speakers and discussants today. Thank you to my team at RWSN, to Aline and Battery in the background who've been organising everything, to Alec and Bethlehem at Agenda for Change. And just thanks to all of you for turning up today, and see you at the next one.